Today, I want to discuss a phenomenon that is more common than we often acknowledge: a man who lives alone without a girlfriend. This is not a moral judgment or a cultural critique, but rather a physiological and psychological exploration of how this lifestyle affects the brain, the body, and behavior. Let's begin by recognizing that social connection is a biological necessity, not merely a social convenience. The human brain has evolved with mechanisms that track status, connection, and safety, often through relationships. However, solitude is not inherently negative. The absence of a romantic partner does not equal failure, nor does it imply dysfunction. It simply places unique demands and offers unique opportunities for self-regulation. A man who lives alone without a girlfriend operates within a unique neurochemical environment, one that is deeply shaped by his social context, or the absence of one. While relationships, particularly romantic ones, are known to activate the release of bonding neurochemicals like oxytocin and vasopressin, their absence does not imply a complete lack of neurochemical regulation. Instead, the brain adapts. It shifts the balance, often relying more heavily on dopamine and other internal signaling systems to regulate motivation, reward, and emotional states. Oxytocin, often referred to as the bonding hormone, plays a significant role in trust, connection, and emotional intimacy. It is typically released during moments of close physical contact, such as hugging, sexual activity, or even shared eye contact with someone you care about. In romantic relationships, repeated exposure to such moments builds a neurochemical feedback loop that creates a sense of safety, warmth, and belonging. When those experiences are absent, such as when a man lives alone without a partner, oxytocin release is naturally reduced. But the brain doesn't simply go into deficiency mode. Instead, it reallocates its resources and begins to rely more on self-generated systems of motivation and connection. One of the most dominant systems in this regard is the dopamine pathway. Dopamine is commonly misunderstood as a pleasure chemical, but it is more accurately a driver of motivation and goal-directed behavior. In solitude, especially without the external cues and feedback loops that come from a romantic partner, men often find themselves seeking out accomplishments, routines, and personal growth to stimulate this system. This is why many men who live alone become highly structured in their lives, organizing their time around fitness, work, hobbies, or self-improvement. Each small win, each completed task, triggers a dopamine response that reinforces the behavior. Over time, this becomes a self-sustaining loop. However, there is a catching: dopamine systems require variability and novelty. Repeating the same routine without adjusting goals or introducing new challenges can cause the system to become desensitized. This is similar to how addictive behaviors escalate, seeking more intense stimuli for the same reward. Men living alone must therefore become aware of how they structure their environments and routines. The key is to create achievable but meaningful challenges, ensuring a steady supply of reward signals without tipping into unhealthy behaviors like compulsive gaming, social media scrolling, or overworking. Interestingly, the absence of oxytocin can also drive men to seek connection in more subtle ways. This might manifest through deep friendships, interactions with pets, or even participation in online communities. The brain is wired to connect, and when the most direct avenue, romantic partnership, is unavailable, it doesn't stop trying. Instead, it diversifies. This adaptive flexibility shows the resilience of the brain. It's not that a man without a girlfriend is missing something essential. Rather, his brain is rerouting pathways to meet essential needs through different methods. The implications of this neurochemical shift are profound. For instance, motivation in partnered individuals is often influenced by relational goals, such as planning a future together, co-regulating stress, or building mutual success. In contrast, a solitary man typically directs his efforts inward. His progress markers are self-defined. This can lead to increased independence and resilience, but may also lead to blind spots if there's no external feedback. Therefore, self-awareness becomes crucial. Journaling, meditation, or even therapy can serve as mirrors, allowing a man to track his mental state and recalibrate when needed. Ultimately, the absence of a girlfriend does not equate to neurochemical deficiency. Instead, it invites a shift from relational bonding to self-generated motivation. The systems are different, but both are valid, adaptive, and capable of sustaining well-being. If understood and consciously managed, cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, plays a central role in how humans manage daily challenges. It follows a natural rhythm, rising in the early morning to prepare us for the day and gradually tapering off toward evening to allow for rest. Emotional connection, particularly through physical touch and intimacy, plays a powerful regulatory role in this rhythm. For a man who lives alone without a girlfriend, the absence of these emotionally co-regulating experiences can subtly or significantly impact how his body handles stress, both in acute moments and over long periods of time. When someone is in a close relationship, simple gestures like a hug, kind words, or even shared silence can cause measurable reductions in cortisol levels. These interactions activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for rest and digest functions, and counteract the sympathetic nervous system, which governs the fight or flight response. In other words, relationships often serve as a natural buffer against stress. For men living alone, that buffer is less available or entirely absent, which can cause stress to linger longer than it otherwise would. The body and brain must then find other ways to regulate the stress response. That doesn't mean a man living alone is doomed to chronic stress. The nervous system is highly plastic, and stress regulation can be trained, much like a muscle. One of the most effective strategies is the deliberate use of OE behavioral tools that restore autonomic balance. These include physical practices like deep breathing, particularly protocols like physiological sighs, where 2 quick inhales are followed by a long exhale, which help reduce heart rate and lower cortisol quickly. Exercise all serves as a powerful modulator of the stress response. Regular cardiovascular training increases the efficiency of the body's stress recovery cycle, while resistance training supports hormone health, including testosterone and growth hormone, both of which buffer the effects of stress. Light exposure is another often overlooked tool. Getting natural sunlight in the morning not only anchors the body's circadian rhythm, which governs sleep and wakefulness, but also indirectly affects cortisol regulation. Morning light tells the brain that it's time to be alert, promoting a healthy spike in cortisol that aligns with the day's start. In men who live alone and may not have social or emotional anchors to help structure their days, using environmental cues like light exposure becomes even more important. Conversely, avoiding bright artificial light late at night helps cortisol taper down appropriately, allowing for better sleep. Another critical tool in stress management. One particularly interesting effect of living alone is that stress can sometimes become invisible. Without another person present to reflect back changes in mood tone or energy, it's easy for chronic low-level stress to become the background noise of life. This can lead to subtle but significant shifts in physiology: poor sleep, irritability, low motivation, or even low-grade inflammation. These symptoms often accumulate slowly and can be mistaken for personality traits or aging, when in reality they are downstream effects of unregulated stress. Another strategy for managing this involves intentional social connection. Even though romantic relationships are a primary form of emotional intimacy, they are not the only path. Close friendships, mentorships, and regular participation in community, whether in person or virtual, can provide enough interpersonal regulation to help keep the stress system in check. Importantly, these interactions must involve genuine emotional exchange, not just surface-level conversation. The key factor isn't simply being around people, it's feeling emotionally seen and understood. Finally, touch itself, one of the most potent cortisol regulators, is not entirely out of reach for those living alone. Simple acts like massage therapy, self-massage, or even owning a pet can provide the necessary physical contact to activate oxytocin and lower stress levels. Pets in particular have been shown to reduce cortisol levels and heart rate variability, providing emotional grounding in ways that are surprisingly similar to human interaction. In summary, while the absence of a romantic partner can remove one natural pathway for stress regulation, the human nervous system offers many alternate routes. By understanding and deliberately engaging with tools like breathwork, exercise, light exposure, and authentic social connection, a man living alone can not only manage cortisol effectively, but also build a more resilient and self-regulated nervous system. In the context of living alone without a girlfriend, one of the most important psychological and neurological adaptations a man must make is the development of internal motivation systems. In a romantic relationship, a significant amount of behavioral regulation comes from external reinforcement. Partners support, encourage, and sometimes even challenge each other to meet goals, stick to routines, and maintain standards. When that external scaffolding is removed, the responsibility for generating drive and direction falls entirely on the individual. This can be both a challenge and an opportunity, depending on how the motivational circuits of the brain are structured and maintained. Motivation is primarily driven by the neurotransmitter dopamine, which is not released simply by achieving success or receiving rewards. Instead, dopamine is largely associated with the anticipation of reward and the effort toward it. It is the molecule of pursuit. In a relationship, many goals are shared: planning a trip, improving lifestyle together, or saving for the future. These goals produce a constant stream of small dopamine releases as steps are taken together. Without a partner, a man must learn how to generate that same reward chemistry independently through systems that track effort, reinforce progress, and renew direction. One of the most effective strategies for this is creating structured, goal-oriented routines. For example, rather than simply exercising when he feels like it, a man who lives alone benefits from committing to a training schedule with clear, measurable milestones. This transforms the routine from a vague idea into a dopamine-releasing sequence. Each session completed is a signal to the brain that effort leads to reward. Over time, this builds momentum and reinforces the value of discipline. Without this structure, motivation can easily drift into inconsistency, which often feeds into cycles of guilt or low self-worth, both of which are demotivating in themselves. Crucially, the size and framing of goals matter. Dopamine responds not only to big wins, but also to small, incremental progress. This is called intermittent reinforcement, and it's a powerful tool for maintaining motivation over time. A man living alone can harness this by breaking larger projects into smaller, achievable steps. Whether he's learning a new language, building a business, or simply improving his physical fitness, creating visible markers of progress triggers the same brain chemistry that keeps people engaged in relationships. Only now it's self-directed. However, there's also a deeper psychological element at play: identity. In relationships, identity is partly constructed and reinforced through interaction with another person. Compliments, feedback, and shared memories shape how we see ourselves. In solitude, a man must become the narrator and witness of his own story. This requires reflection, journaling, self-assessment, and long-term vision planning. These are not abstract practices. They are forms of internal feedback that help regulate motivation. When done regularly, they allow the brain to track growth over time and generate the same sense of personal meaning and continuity that relationships often provide. Another tool that becomes essential in this context is time blocking. When days are unstructured, it's easy to fall into a reactive mode where behavior is dictated by impulse rather than intention. But the dopamine system thrives on predictability and reward. By assigning specific blocks of time to specific activities, creative work, physical movement, rest, learning, a man creates a rhythm that mirrors the structure often provided by relational life. This rhythm helps regulate not only motivation, but also mood and energy levels. It's also important to recognize the emotional component. Without a partner to share setbacks or celebrate wins with, emotional validation must be internally sourced. This doesn't mean suppressing feelings. It means learning to recognize effort, even when the outcome isn't perfect. Self-compassion plays a critical role in this. When a man can acknowledge his progress with kindness rather than criticism, he reinforces his own behavior rather than undermining it. Ultimately, living alone without a girlfriend requires a deliberate approach to self-leadership. It demands that a man take full ownership of his time, goals, and emotional landscape. While it can be isolating at times, it also offers a unique opportunity, the chance to become the kind of person who does not depend on external motivation to grow, but instead cultivates an inner engine that is reliable, resilient, and deeply aligned with purpose. Solitude, when chosen intentionally and managed well, can be a powerful amplifier of creativity, focus, and cognitive performance. For a man who lives alone without a girlfriend, this quiet space, free from the emotional and logistical demands of a romantic relationship, can become fertile ground for deep thinking, personal projects, and original work. However, the potential of solitude is dual-sided. Without structure and conscious intention, the same environment can lead to overthinking, emotional dysregulation, and what's known as negative default mode activity, rumination, self-criticism, and anxiety. Understanding the underlying brain mechanisms helps in leveraging solitude for growth rather than being consumed by it. The human brain operates across various networks. One of the most studied in recent years is the default mode network, DMNers. This network becomes active when the brain is not focused on a specific task, essentially when we're daydreaming, reminiscing, or reflecting. In structured solitude, the DMN can facilitate creative insight, problem solving, and long-term planning. Many scientific discoveries, philosophical insights, and works of art have emerged during moments of deep solitude, when distractions were minimized and the mind had space to connect disparate ideas. But the DMN is also where unregulated thought loops like worry, regret, or comparison can arise, especially in the absence of social feedback or external engagement. When a man lives alone, especially over an extended period, his cognitive environment becomes heavily self-influenced. There are fewer external inputs to disrupt unhelpful thoughts or redirect attention. This is why solitude must be paired with structure and intention. One of the most effective strategies is deep works, a concept rooted in focusing on cognitively demanding tasks without distraction. By engaging the brain's executive control network, deep work suppresses DMN activity and trains the brain to stay task-oriented. This not only boosts productivity, but also serves as a mental health buffer, reducing the chances of getting stuck in emotional spirals. Creative output also benefits from aerated mental space, periods of time where the mind is allowed to wander in a constructive way. These are moments often found in solitude, taking long walks without a phone, sketching, playing an instrument, or free writing. These practices open a gateway to subconscious processing, allowing the brain to integrate ideas and generate original thought. The key distinction here is that these periods are still active. They involve mild engagement rather than passive consumption, such as binge, watching shows, or scrolling through social media, which often dull creativity and overstimulate the brain in fragmented ways. Sleep and circadian rhythm play an important role as well. Without the natural social cues that relationships provide, like shared mealtimes, sleep schedules, and morning routines, a man living alone may drift into irregular rhythms. However, circadian regularity is foundational for mental clarity. Maintaining a consistent sleep-wake cycle, optimizing light exposure, and avoiding digital overstimulation at night are crucial not just for physical health, but for preserving cognitive sharpness and emotional regulation, both of which support sustained creativity. Solitude also invites a man to cultivate internal feedback systems. In a relationship, creativity and ambition are often externally validated through encouragement, interest, or shared enthusiasm. Alone, a man must become his own source of encouragement and discernment. This means learning to evaluate one's own work, recognizing progress, and adjusting course without relying on external praise. This self-referencing skill strengthens executive function and builds a deeper, more autonomous sense of purpose. But again, the quality of solitude depends on its context. If a man isolates unintentionally due to fear, trauma, or low self-worth, then the same solitude that could lead to creative insight may instead feed negative self-narratives. This is where Vassar's intentional solitude differs from loneliness. Intentional solitude is chosen, structured, and integrated with routines that stimulate the mind, body, and nervous system. It is proactive rather than passive. In sum, when approached with discipline and curiosity, solitude becomes a superpower. It opens cognitive space for innovation, deepens self-understanding, and allows for the execution of meaningful work without distraction. For the man who lives alone without a girlfriend, it offers an opportunity to tune his mental and emotional instruments with precision, crafting a life of deliberate thought and authentic creativity. Human beings are biologically wired for connection. Oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine, neurochemicals linked to bonding, trust, and motivation, are all stimulated through meaningful social interaction. For a man who lives alone without a girlfriend, the absence of daily, intimate emotional connection doesn't eliminate the need for these chemicals. It simply redirects how and where they are sourced. While romantic relationships often serve as a primary channel for these emotional needs, the brain is adaptable. It seeks alternative pathways, and one of the most effective is building a strong support system through friendships, community involvement, and consistent social engagement. Friendships serve as an essential pillar for emotional regulation and psychological stability. Close, emotionally honest male friendships are often underestimated in their power to stabilize mood, improve motivation, and reduce stress. When a man can speak freely about his experiences, challenges, and aspirations with someone he trusts, it creates a sense of mirrored validation, similar to what is experienced in a romantic relationship. This mirroring helps deactivate the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, and activates the prefrontal cortex, allowing for clearer thinking and emotional control. However, cultivating these relationships requires effort and vulnerability, especially in a culture that often encourages emotional self-containment in men. A man living alone without a girlfriend must deliberately prioritize building and maintaining friendships. This can include scheduling regular calls or meetups, joining interest-based groups or communities, or simply making time for shared experiences like hiking, working out, or creative projects. The key is not frequency, but depth. Shallow, transactional social interactions won't meet the brain's need for connection. What matters is the presence of trust, shared values, and emotional resonance. Community involvement provides another layer of social nourishment. Participating in group activities, whether through sports, volunteering, professional organizations, or spiritual gatherings, helps reinforce a sense of belonging. Belonging is more than a comfort. It's a neural signal that safety and support are present. This, in turn, lowers baseline cortisol levels and improves emotional resilience. For a man living alone, regularly immersing himself in environments where he feels accepted and valued can act as a stabilizing force, especially during times of emotional difficulty. Importantly, technology can both help and hinder this process. Social media, texting, and virtual communities offer accessibility, but they lack the physiological components of in-person interaction. Facial expressions, eye contact, voice tone, and physical presence, all of which play key roles in regulating the nervous system. While online connections can supplement real-world interaction, they cannot replace it. Therefore, it's important for men who live alone to balance digital communication with face-to-face or voice-based interaction to maintain emotional vitality. One of the often overlooked strategies for cultivating a support system is offering value first. People are naturally drawn to those who support, encourage, and uplift them. By becoming someone who consistently shows up for others, a man builds a network of reciprocity. This doesn't mean overextending or neglecting his own needs. It means creating a dynamic of mutual care. Small gestures like checking and celebrating others' wins or providing a listening ear can forge deep bonds over time. Another important element is mentorship, both receiving and giving. Having someone look up to can to provide guidance and perspective especially during moments of doubt or confusion. Likewise, being a mentor can give a man a sense of purpose and continuity. These relationships foster a deeper kind of connection, one that's rooted in growth, accountability, and trust. Finally, it's critical to understand that connection doesn't require romantic partnership to be meaningful or fulfilling. A well-developed support system, composed of friends, peers, mentors, and community, can meet the emotional needs that might otherwise be sourced from a girlfriend. It provides stability, reflection, and challenge. For a man who lives alone, the presence of such a network ensures that while he may be independent in his daily life, he is not isolated in his emotional life. This distinction is vital for long-term psychological health, resilience, and even cognitive function. Through active and intentional connection with others, he builds a life of both autonomy and belonging. Living alone without a girlfriend creates a unique opportunity for a man to engage in a powerful process, self-mastery. While relationships often provide comfort, support, and shared responsibility, solitude shifts all focus inward. It challenges a man to take full ownership of his physical health, mental clarity, habits, emotions, and long-term direction. Without the emotional reinforcement of a partner or the influence of shared routines, the man who lives alone is faced with the question, what kind of person do I choose to become when no one is watching? The answer to that question defines the arc of his life. Self-mastery begins with Goyo's self-awareness cue, which deepens significantly in solitude. When distractions are minimized and external validation is removed, a man is left with his own thoughts, decisions, and patterns. This can be uncomfortable at first. Many people unknowingly rely on the noise of life, social media, conversations, romantic attention, to avoid sitting with themselves. But once the initial discomfort is confronted and explored, solitude reveals itself as a mirror. Patterns emerge, impulses become more visible. Habits, whether constructive or destructive, stand out in stark relief. This clarity becomes the foundation of personal growth. One of the most empowering realizations a man can have in this state is that discipline is not punishment. It is freedom. With no one else structuring his time, he must become the architect of his own discipline. This means developing a consistent routine, waking up at the same time each day, training the body through exercise, nourishing it through clean eating, protecting the mind through reading and journaling, and aligning actions with long-term goals. These routines don't just shape behavior, they reshape the nervous system. Neural pathways are rewired. Dopamine is anchored to effort rather than outcome. The man becomes self-reinforcing, less dependent on external rewards or approval. Solitude also gives room for spiritual and philosophical development. This doesn't necessarily mean religion. It means exploring values, purpose, and what it means to live a meaningful life. Many men in relationships outsource this exploration to the shared identity of the partnership. Alone, that exploration becomes a solo expedition. It invites deeper questioning. What am I building? What legacy do I want to leave? What does integrity look like in my private life? These questions, when taken seriously, create a gravitational pull toward better choices and deeper commitment. Self-mastery also involves confronting emotional regulation without external reassurance. In relationships, it's common to lean on a partner for comfort or to vent frustration. Alone, a must become both the observer and the soother of his emotional state. Practices like breathwork, meditation, journaling, and cold exposure become tools to train emotional resilience. He learns to witness discomfort without being overtaken by it. He becomes fluent in the language of internal feedback, recognizing when he's off course and adjusting with clarity and decisiveness. Emotional maturity deepens not because it's required for someone else, but because he demands it of himself. Crucially, this inner development is not a retreat from the world. On the contrary, it prepares a man to return to the world stronger, clearer, and more aligned. When a man masters himself in solitude, he becomes the kind of person who can enter relationships from a place of wholeness, not need. He no longer seeks a partner to complete him, distract him, or heal him. He seeks a partner to build with him, to grow alongside, not because he needs them, but because he chooses to share the life he has already cultivated. Living alone then becomes a dojo, a sacred training ground. Each day offers the chance to strengthen discipline, sharpen focus, deepen emotional resilience, and clarify values. The absence of a girlfriend is not a deficiency. It is a condition of potential. It is the forge in which character is tempered and direction is chosen with full autonomy. In this space, a man has the freedom and responsibility to become the best version of himself, not someday, but now. And that ultimately is the essence of self-mastery.